Welcome back for our fourth and final module. There's really been a lot of great discussion in the forums in the earlier modules, and I'm sure that you'll find lots of interesting things to say and questions to ask about what we're looking at this week. This final module is about what I'm calling enterprise explanatory journalism, or what you could just call big pieces. It's not the kind of work everybody does, and nobody does it all the time, but it's worth looking at, partly because I think many of you will do this kind of work at some point, but it's also because I think that the pieces discussed this week lay out some principles and considerations that apply to most efforts in explanatory journalism. So here's what we'll be discussing today. We'll be talking about the definition of this genre. We'll be talking about finding a big topic and what we mean by big. We'll be talking about the different paths people can take to landing in an enterprise project and how to dive deep on a subject while avoiding getting caught what we call in the weeds. In general, enterprise in journalism means an article or articles that didn't happen all by themselves in the sense of coming out of news events that would have been covered in the normal course of business. When you write an enterprise piece, you are putting something on the agenda that wouldn't otherwise be there, with the opportunities and obligations that implies. Enterprise also means special in the sense of warranting extra space or more prominent play. Such pieces also take an unusual amount of time to prepare and extra resources. That could often include making data analysis, complex graphics, or video a part of the package. Put it all together and put it on the top of the front page or home page, and you are saying to the reader, this is important. So to get all that time and space and the bells and whistles, it better be worth it. What makes a topic worth it? The ideal topic for an enterprise explainer is something that's important, complex, and poorly understood in the way that has significant consequences. By important, we mean important to you, to your editors, to your readers, and to the community they represent. Of course, a lot of different kinds of enterprise reporting meets those criteria. And in some ways, the question of whether something is investigative or explanatory isn't all that relevant, and certainly not to the reader. By the way, the Pulitzer Committee has pretty regularly moved entries submitted for an investigative prize into the explanatory category. The difference to me is that the service performed in explanatory enterprise is less in uncovering a set of facts that someone has sought to conceal than in making clear the workings and consequences of something that was not hidden, but whose significance was little known. A good topic doesn't even have to be all that sexy and can even sound kind of dull, like a truly terrific series in the Times a few years ago about how it costs New York City much more to build a mile of subway than anywhere else in the world. The series basically asked, why is that? Maybe why is that is as good a yardstick as anything else for judging the worth of a topic. We are professionally curious, and our curiosity is always a clue to the chance that something interesting or important is tickling us. Where and how does that curiosity lead to a finished product? By any number of paths. Let's look at some of the projects discussed in this week's videos and in some earlier modules. So one path is what we can call follow your nose. The articles on tax loopholes by Zach Miter were what you might call an accidental series. That is, he didn't set out initially to write a series. He wrote a news story that made him want to learn more about something that was news to him, even though it wasn't especially new. In the minds of many others covering the crazy world of taxes, it was very much not news. But he was interested, so he started with one story and then another. And once his coverage gained momentum, he and his editors looked for ways to broaden it beyond the specific company maneuvers he had started with, and to make the implications of these tax loopholes more understandable in human terms. But he was really just following his nose. Another path is digging deep. The Quantum magazine article on the Webb Space Telescope, by contrast, was conceived of as a single article, not a series. But from the beginning, it was going to be a very long and sweeping piece. As Thomas Lynn and Natalie Walchover saw it, the launching of the Webb was bound to be the biggest event in astronomy since the launching of the Hubble Space Telescope in 1990, and in many ways a bigger deal, as it was bound to unlock many more scientific discoveries than the Hubble. That is, if it didn't end in an epic disaster. This was also an occasion to tell the story of the major developments in the field in the decades since the Webb was first conceived, as well as the parallel tales of the engineering struggle to create what may be the most complicated object ever made by humans, and the life stories of some of the astronomers who would be putting the Webb to work. So here the challenge was how to tell the whole A to Z tale while making the abstruse physics involved understandable and the package engaging enough for readers to want to keep going. You can judge the skill involved by how easy Natalie and Tom make it look. Next, we're going to talk about work on an epic scale. It's pretty easy for me to guess the thinking behind the way the Washington Post series called 2 Degrees Celsius came to be. There was a feeling in the newsroom that people had been reading about the 2-degree target of the Paris climate talks, but didn't realize how bad things were already, didn't know that some parts of the globe had already seen that kind of increase and weren't aware that the extreme weather predicted from that level of climate change could already be seen and felt. So the idea was, let's explain this by showing how this looks on the ground around the world. And let's demonstrate how big a topic we think this is. That is, there's no bigger topic by the size and scope of the series we create and the resources we devote to it. They were saying, we'll throw every tool we've got at this, like graphics, maps, and videos, and let's involve our best reporters, both those who are covering relevant beats like the environment and energy, and some who are just damn fine writers. Of course, very few newsrooms have the kinds of resources that the Post did to throw at such a project. But for every newsroom, there are a few subjects that could merit a big commitment of resources. Now, the hell and high water package that was discussed by Professor Wybe in the introductory module was also an effort to push boundaries, but in a different way. By my reading, the impetus came from the close call Houston had when Hurricane Ike swerved at the last minute after almost dealing the city a direct hit. So the question was, can we explain just how bad it would have been if it had hit? And can we make clear the kind of danger Houston continues to face without having to wait for the actual damage to be done? That led to an exploration of the subject in ways that relied on two new trends that are of growing importance in journalism: modeling and collaboration. Computer modeling of weather events, especially of extreme weather, has made great leaps forward in recent years. So it makes sense to see what the computers might forecast if you fed the data in to suggest what might have happened if Ike didn't swerve. Finding that out doesn't involve knocking on a lot of doors or making a ton of phone calls the way traditional journalistic projects might. It required the skills of serious climate scientists whose expertise went well beyond what the journalists brought to the table. That meant that the project could only come about as a collaboration, in this case between the journalists and professors at Rice, UT Austin, Texas A&M Galveston, and Jackson State University. And that collaboration came on top of a partnership between the Texas Tribune, a nonprofit news site, Reveal, an investigative program on National Public Radio, and ProPublica, a nonprofit site that specializes both in investigative projects and in top-tier data visualizations. So those are the paths that got those 4 projects going. How can you find the path to your project? Maybe you already have one in mind, but if you don't, my advice is, once again, it's something that sounds pretty obvious. Be curious. If you're new on a beat or new to a subject, take full advantage both of the fresh perspective you're bringing and the license to ask dumb questions that comes with being a rookie at anything. And that comes on top of our regular license to always be able to ask stupid questions. So in your new beat, what are the things that everybody seems to take for granted that make you say, huh? Don't be put off if you're told that's old news. Everybody knows that. You didn't know it. Why would you think that your readers do? But a fresh eye is different from a full notebook. Experience is important, and taking on a big project brings with it the obligation to understand the subject deeply. I don't think I'm the only writer who's looked back at stories I wrote while new to a beat and thought, boy, I really didn't know what I didn't know. It's one of those paradoxes of journalism. Somebody very new to a subject and somebody who's covered something for a long time are both going to have blind spots. And as with so many of other journalism's tough problems, the solution is in plain old working hard and writing a lot. Keep a list of potential enterprise projects and check it every now and then. Maybe you feel more ready now to take on a topic than when you first noticed it. Or maybe now you see why the story is different from what you first thought. Or maybe you've come across something completely different that's better. And remember, you don't need the formal label of a series to go after a topic and stay on it. You can do what you might call an informal series, or you might call just like really working something. There's a saying in the military that you should reinforce success. If what you're doing is working, do more of it. Now let's look at the other side of the coin, how to write about a topic you might feel like you know almost too well. How do we find that balance between diving deeply into a subject and sinking into the weeds? There's no magic formula, but here are some tips. Setting limits. In print journalism, limits are literally built into the process of producing content. The day's newspaper is only so big. But on the web, it's clear sailing, which of course is dangerous. So it's good to set some limits before you get too deep into the writing. That's both as to the number of parts in a series and the length of an individual piece. I once had to cut a 9,000 word story I'd written down to about 2,000 words. Was the piece better for it? Yes. But did I wish I'd written it shorter in the first place? Yes. Maybe that kind of cutting is hard for you to do, but okay, let's be clear. It's hard for everybody to do. That's part of why editors are really such wonderful people. You can count on them to do the terrible things you can't bring yourself to do. By the way, did you know that Stalin's main role in Russia's Communist Party before the revolution was as the editor of its newspaper. And once again, you have to think of your audience. What ABCs do you need to give them on a long form project so they'll understand when you get to XYZ? But that kind of calculation can be harder on a longer piece and on a subject where you have stuffed your brain more full of facts than usual. Again, ideally, you can lean on your editor for help with this, but you can also seek out a friend or a colleague who, while more sympathetic than your editor, can turn a more objective gaze on your copy than you can. And then there's an outline. By now, I must sound like a broken record, but outlines become more important as word count goes up. And on enterprise projects, you can outline the entire series on top of doing outlines of the individual pieces. Making choices before you start writing about which fascinating, but maybe slightly off the point topics you will or won't go into is easier than doing it when you're already 3,000 words deep. And even more so than with regular sized articles, focus is key. Keep reminding yourself of the main point you want the project to get across and ask, does this fact or that quote move me toward the goal? Is this something the reader needs to take in, or is it a detour into something I want to write about because I took the trouble to learn about it? The tendency to want to show off all the work that we've done is always something to resist, but it's an even bigger problem on bigger pieces. Like an iceberg, most of your knowledge is going to stay out of sight. It's all still worth knowing. It's just not all worth showing. So let's review what we've learned. An enterprise explainer isn't just a really long explainer, just as a novel isn't just a really, really long short story. Our examples have showed us that they can take many different forms and you can approach them from different directions, but some of the most important principles still apply. Know your audience and keep in mind what they need to know. Make sure you know the subject well enough to explain it. Planning will help you keep a balance between too much and too little information. And clarity, clarity, clarity is the goal. Thank you for watching. There will be one more video this week, wrapping up some thoughts about the whole course. And I'll tell you a story about the longest, hardest, and most meaningful explanatory project I ever worked on. Have a good week, have great discussions, and be well.